Ethan Cole had always believed that 2 years was enough to understand any culture. He'd been sent as a diplomatic envoy to the Cresian Empire, tasked with negotiating a communication treaty between humans and aliens. He studied the Cresian language until it echoed in his dreams, his tongue effortlessly moving through their melodic speech patterns. He immersed himself in their customs and history, carefully observing their intricate social hierarchies. The Cresians were an enigmatic species, ancient, technologically advanced, and deeply spiritual. As an envoy, Ethan's role was more than just a representative of Earth. He was a bridge between two worlds. He'd eaten their food, celebrated their festivals, and earned enough respect to be called a friend by people who once viewed humans as little more than curious creatures. Ethan had done everything he could to ensure smooth relations, but even now, standing in the towering halls of the Grand Citadel, he still felt like an outsider. He thought he understood the Cresians, their way of life, their royal protocol. Yet, in the presence of Queen Nilara, all of that seemed irrelevant. Nilara was a figure of power, her rule respected by all. Her strength was unchallenged, her mind sharp as a blade. She ruled with a delicate balance of authority and grace, an impeccable monarch surrounded by whispers of greatness. But there was something about her, something Ethan couldn't quite place, a coldness that lingered beneath her composed exterior. He had learned a great deal about her through political briefings and interactions with her court, but there was so much more that remained hidden, locked behind the walls of her royal fortress. As Ethan walked through the Citadel's grand halls, the weight of the history surrounding him pressed down. The Cresians had ruled for millennia. He was just a human, one small piece in a much larger puzzle. But that would change. He had no idea yet just how much. The Grand Citadel was an awe-inspiring structure, towering spires that stretched into the sky like the fingers of a giant, each one crafted from shimmering metal that resonated with harmonic frequencies. The Citadel was alive in a way that human architecture could never be. The walls hummed with the energy of centuries of rule, and the air around Ethan seemed charged, as though even the atmosphere was infused with the weight of power. Every corner of this place whispered of the grandeur and mystery of the Cresian Empire. Ethan had spent months preparing for this moment, his private audience with Queen Nilara. The walls here were lined with intricate carvings, stories of ancient victories, and the achievements of the Cresian people. Yet, as he walked deeper into the Citadel's core, he couldn't shake the feeling of being a mere visitor, an intruder in a world that had existed for far longer than humanity could comprehend. The reception hall where the Queen awaited him was breathtaking in its simplicity. The ceiling stretched high above, a field of living crystal that shifted colors with the movement of the sun. The floor was polished obsidian, smooth and reflecting the light from the towering windows that framed the space. As Ethan walked in, the doors closed behind him with a quiet, almost imperceptible thud. The air shifted. The silence was palpable, heavy with expectation. And there, standing at the far end of the hall, was Queen Nilara. Her throne was not a traditional seat of power. It was a living structure, grown from crystal and energy, constantly shifting and reshaping in response to her emotional state. Right now, it was jagged and sharp, its edges like the pointed claws of a beast. It mirrored the tension in the Queen herself, a woman who carried the weight of an entire empire on her shoulders. Her appearance was striking. Auburn hair streaked with silver pulled back tightly from her face, accentuating her sharp features. The 12 rings on her ears, each representing a trial she had overcome, gleamed in the dim light. She was every inch the monarch, every step a reminder of her authority. Yet, beneath that mask of regal composure, Ethan could sense something more, something human. He couldn't explain it, but it was there, lurking just beneath the surface. As Nilara's eyes met his, there was no warmth, no recognition of the shared history they had built over the past 2 years. There was only a cold intensity, the kind of look that could freeze a man in place. "You're not leaving, Ethan Cole," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Ethan felt the room close in around him, the weight of her words heavier than any physical force. He had no idea what this meeting would bring, but he knew one thing for certain: nothing would be the same after this. Ethan stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. The Queen's words rang in his ears, but they made no sense. "You're not leaving, Ethan Cole." The words were delivered with a quiet finality that left no room for argument. The hum of the Citadel's energy seemed to grow louder, more oppressive, as if the very air around them was waiting for something to happen. Ethan had prepared for this moment, but not like this. The protocols of diplomacy, the calm negotiations, the fine-tuned political maneuvering, none of it had prepared him for the directness of the Queen's words. Her eyes locked onto his, intense and unwavering, like two amber flames burning in the dark. Her face remained unreadable, but Ethan could sense the undercurrent of something deeper. He knew Nilara to be a powerful ruler, an astute politician, and an unyielding leader. But there was something in her gaze now that unsettled him, something that spoke of a turmoil he hadn't anticipated. It was the first time in their 2 years of interaction that he truly felt the weight of her position, her isolation. Ethan took a cautious step forward, maintaining the diplomatic distance that his training had instilled in him. "Your Majesty, the treaty is finalized," he said, his voice steady despite the growing unease in his stomach. "My replacement arrives in 3 weeks. My government expects my departure." He kept his tone professional, a practiced mask hiding the confusion threatening to break through. He had expected to leave the Cresian Empire with a handshake, a formal goodbye, and a sense of accomplishment. This unexpected demand, was something else entirely. Nilara's expression remained unmoving, but the tension in the room was palpable. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. She took a slow step toward him, her regal presence filling the space. "Your government's expectations are no longer relevant." The words were sharp, cold, and laced with an authority that brooked no argument. She moved with the deliberate grace of someone accustomed to controlling every room she entered. "What matters now is containment, damage control, and your presence where I can monitor it." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. His diplomatic training kicked in, and he masked his growing discomfort with a neutral expression. "Containment? What are you talking about, Your Majesty?" His mind raced, trying to piece together the sudden shift in tone. This was more than just a diplomatic discussion. Something was wrong, something he couldn't yet understand. Nilara stopped in front of him, just close enough for him to see the faint tremor in her hands, the slight lines of exhaustion around her eyes. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her gaze softened for the briefest of moments before she spoke again, her voice quieter, tinged with something personal. "The Festival of Convergence," she said, her eyes looking away, as if recalling something painful. 4 months ago. You remember?" Ethan nodded slowly. How could he forget? The festival had been a time of celebration, a rare celestial event that only occurred once every 27 years. The entire planet had erupted into music and celebration, an atmosphere of pure joy and abandon. And he, too, had joined in, caught up in the magic of it all. He remembered it clearly. The way the two of them had found each other on a private balcony, overlooking the festivities. They had talked for hours, not as queen and envoy, but as two people carrying burdens too heavy to share with anyone else. And when the second moon had reached its zenith, casting everything in silver light, they had kissed. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the memory resurfaced, unexpected and jarring. But before he could respond, Nilara's voice broke through his thoughts, and the truth hit him like a physical blow. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. The words seemed to echo in his mind, but they made no sense. Ethan's legs felt like they might give way beneath him. His mind raced through every possibility, every explanation, but nothing fit. Human and Cresian genetics were not compatible. They couldn't be. Every study, every scientific conclusion had ruled this out. But Nilara's eyes, the solemnity there, made it clear. The child was his. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. Ethan's mind spun in disbelief. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. He couldn't process what Nilara had just told him. "I'm pregnant." The impossibility of it all paralyzed him, his rational mind working in overdrive to reject the very idea. This isn't possible," Ethan managed to stammer, his voice sounding distant, as though someone else was speaking. Humans and Cresians, every study, every analysis. His words trailed off into nothingness. Nilara's eyes were fixed on him with a kind of resigned sorrow, as though she knew the storm that was about to hit him and the entire empire. Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of frustration, even bitterness, that she couldn't quite suppress. "The genetic markers are unmistakable," she said quietly. "Half Cresian, half human. The child is yours." The world around him seemed to tilt. He staggered backward slightly, trying to steady himself, his mind unable to grasp what was happening. This wasn't just an emotional or personal bombshell. It wasn't just about him and Nilara. It was about everything, their worlds, their people, the fragile peace between Earth and the Cresian Empire. The weight of that thought nearly crushed him. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "But how? How is this even possible?" His eyes were locked onto Nilara's, but it felt like he was speaking to the very universe itself. His breath quickened as the impossible reality set in. This couldn't be real. There had to be a mistake. Nilara's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her gaze momentarily flickering with anger. It was the first crack in her composed exterior, and Ethan realized then how deeply this was affecting her. "Crushing conception is tied to emotional resonance," she said, her voice tight, almost broken. "And Cresians, we don't reproduce casually. We're not like humans." Ethan felt the weight of her words, but the shock was too overwhelming to let them sink in fully. He had always understood that Cresian culture was one of control and restraint. Reproduction wasn't something that happened without profound emotional connection, a connection that couldn't be faked, a connection that required genuine vulnerability. They didn't reproduce like humans did, casually, often thoughtlessly, without consideration for the broader consequences. Nilara's bitter laugh pulled him from his thoughts. "It's why our birth rates are low," she continued, her tone sharp, almost self-mocking. "Why we treasure each child, why every pregnancy is treated as sacred." "And she stopped, her voice cracking with emotion. She quickly turned her face away, but Ethan could still see the pain there, the deep regret. "I let my guard down, Ethan. Once. And now I'm carrying a child that shouldn't exist." The finality of her words echoed in the silence that stretched between them. It was clear that, despite her outward composure, this was something she could not control. She wasn't just worried about the political consequences. She was frightened, perhaps more than she had ever been. Ethan felt the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just a diplomatic dilemma anymore. This wasn't about treaties and negotiations, or the cold calculations of politics. This was personal, and it had the potential to unravel everything they had worked for. And somehow, it was happening because of a single night. One fleeting moment of connection that neither of them had planned, but both would now carry for the rest of their lives. "Nilara, we need to think about this carefully," Ethan said, his voice low, controlled despite the chaos swirling inside his mind. "What does this mean? For us? For the treaty? For everything?" She didn't answer immediately, and for the first time, Ethan realized that the Queen was as vulnerable as he was. Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of his thoughts. This child, this impossible child, wasn't just a personal issue. It was a political bombshell. The very core of Cresian society, the royal bloodline, everything Nilara had worked for in her 8 years of rule, was now at risk. Nilara moved away from him, her posture rigid, as though she needed distance to think. The tension in the room was unbearable, as though the very air around them had become charged with impending disaster. Ethan could feel his pulse quickening. He had known their cultures were different, their priorities and values worlds apart. But he never imagined this. He never imagined that something as intimate and personal as this child, could throw everything into chaos. She turned back toward him, her face a mask of royal composure, but there was no mistaking the distress behind her eyes. "The royal bloodline," she began, her voice controlled but full of weight, "has been pure for over 2,000 years. My people believe that purity is what maintains our connection to the harmonic fields that power our technology, our culture, and our very identity." Ethan absorbed her words, but his mind was still clouded by the shock of what he had just learned. This was more than just a pregnancy. This was a fundamental challenge to the essence of Cresian civilization. A hybrid heir threatens everything they understand about themselves. She continued, her voice quieter now, almost bitter. Our faith, our traditions, they all revolve around the purity of our bloodlines. A child like this could destabilize everything. He stepped forward, trying to absorb her distress. But you're not just a queen, Nilara. You're a leader. You've built alliances, managed crises. This is something we can manage, right? Her sharp gaze met his, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable. It's not that simple. She took a deep breath, her voice tight with restraint. If word spreads that I am carrying a human child, if it becomes known that the purity of the bloodline has been compromised, the political fallout will be catastrophic. My brother, Vorathth, has been waiting for an excuse like this for years. He'll use it to challenge my reign. Ethan's stomach tightened. Nilara had spoken of her brother before, in passing. A figure of shadowy ambition, someone who didn't share her vision for the future of the Cresian Empire. But hearing it now, with the stakes this high, it hit him differently. Vorathth, her brother, the one who had always felt overshadowed by her rise to power, wasn't just a political rival. He was now a direct threat to the stability of her reign, and the existence of this child would give him the perfect ammunition. If word spreads, Nilara continued, her voice low but fierce, he'll use it against me. He'll claim that I am unfit to rule, that I have allowed myself to be corrupted by alien genetics. She paused, her eyes momentarily shifting toward the window, as if seeing beyond the walls of the citadel, to a future she feared. My people will turn on me. They'll see this child as a symbol of weakness, a flaw in the royal line. Ethan could feel the gravity of her words. This wasn't just about a pregnancy anymore. This was about the future of the Cresian Empire, about war, about survival. But you're a strong queen, he said softly. Your rule has been successful. You've earned their respect. Don't you think that can carry you through this? Nilara shook her head, her ears flattening slightly in a gesture of frustration. It's not about strength, Ethan. It's about belief. And once the people believe something, no amount of strength can change it. If they believe I am unfit to rule, the empire will crumble under the weight of that belief. The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had been sent here to build bridges, to create a future where humans and Cresians could coexist peacefully. But this was an entirely different kind of bridge, one he had no idea how to cross. And your political position? He asked, his voice low. What happens to that? Nilara's eyes darkened. I'm well respected now, yes. But my brother has allies, traditionalists, military leaders, who've been waiting for an excuse to challenge me. And once they have it, there will be no turning back. Ethan could feel the walls closing in. Nilara, the powerful queen he had come to respect, was now cornered. And it was clear, this child, this unexpected, impossible child, was a weapon in a battle that neither of them could afford to lose. Do you think I should contact Earth? Ethan asked, his voice tight with tension. My government, they need to know what's happening. Nilara looked at him, her gaze hardening. No. If Earth learns about this before I can control the situation, they'll recall you immediately. The media will sensationalize it. It will spread like wildfire. And by then, it will be too late. They'll ruin everything. Ethan realized the full extent of the political trap they were in. Then what do we do? She took a deep breath, her posture straightening as if preparing for battle. We control the narrative. We keep this secret. We find a way to deal with Vorathth before he makes his move. Ethan nodded, a sense of determination rising within him. They had to move fast. Because if they didn't, everything, the treaty, the peace they'd worked so hard for, could be lost in an instant. The silence in the room was suffocating as Nilara and Ethan exchanged a single, heavy glance. It was clear now that the stakes were higher than either of them had anticipated. The Queen's carefully constructed world was teetering on the edge, and every decision from here on out would shape the future of not only their lives but the entire Cresian Empire. "I'll need you to stay," Nilara said, her voice calm but firm. "You'll stay here, in the Eastern Tower. It's the only way we can control this. If anyone learns the truth too soon, it will destroy everything." Ethan blinked, his mind struggling to catch up. "Wait, you want me to, what? Stay here, in isolation?" The idea was absurd. He was a diplomat, an envoy. He was supposed to represent Earth, not be imprisoned by an alien queen. Nilara nodded, her gaze hardening. "Yes, Ethan. It's the only way to keep things contained. If you're here, if you're monitored, your government can't learn the truth. No one can. It will give us time." "Time for what? Time for what? Exactly?" Ethan wanted to argue, to push back, but he knew, deep down, that this was the only option. Nilara was right. If Earth found out, the scandal would spread like wildfire. It wasn't just about a political alliance anymore. It was about saving both their people from total collapse. "I'll have you comfortable," Nilara continued, her voice softening just slightly. "The Eastern Tower is equipped with everything you need. You'll be isolated, but not neglected. I'll keep you informed. But your contact with the outside world, your government, Earth, it will be severed. At least for now." Ethan felt the weight of her words. It was a bitter pill to swallow. He had hoped for a peaceful departure from the Cresian Empire, a respectful conclusion to his mission. Instead, he was now a prisoner of circumstance, caught in a web spun by the Queen herself. "I don't like it," he muttered, but Nilara didn't respond. She didn't need to. The decision had already been made. "We have no choice, Ethan," she said quietly. "The consequences are too great, and I can't face them alone." Ethan exhaled slowly, understanding. He wasn't just staying for the sake of the treaty. He was staying to help her find a way through this impossible mess. A mess that, for better or worse, they had both created. Days turned into weeks as Ethan remained confined to the Eastern Tower. The once gleaming walls of the citadel now felt more like prison bars, the humming energy of the palace no longer a reminder of power but a constant, oppressive weight. His contact with Nilara had become the only thing that kept him grounded. She visited regularly, though her visits were always laced with urgency and political matters. They spoke in hushed tones, carefully navigating the delicate situation, but there was always an underlying tension between them. The walls of isolation were closing in, and neither of them could truly escape. As time passed, something subtle began to shift between them. The initial awkwardness of their forced proximity began to wear away, revealing a mutual understanding that neither could deny. Nilara, though regal and powerful, was a woman burdened by impossible choices, and Ethan, despite being a human envoy, was no longer just an outsider. He had become an unlikely ally, her only confidant in a world that was swiftly turning against her. Their conversations became less about the political implications of the child and more about their own fears and hopes for the future. The more Ethan learned about Cresian culture, the more he realized how much Nilara had sacrificed to maintain the stability of her empire. And Nilara, in turn, began to see Ethan not just as a diplomat, but as a man who, despite the impossible circumstances, had never wavered in his resolve to build bridges between their worlds. One evening, as they sat across from one another, the usual political talk faded into the background. Nilara spoke softly, her voice carrying a weariness that was hard to ignore. "I never thought I'd be in this position," she admitted, her eyes distant. "My people, they expect strength, control. But I feel like I'm losing both." Ethan looked at her, his gaze steady. "You're not losing anything, Nilara. You're fighting for something. For a future that no one else can see but you." Her gaze softened at his words, and for the first time in weeks, a faint, genuine smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Perhaps," she said quietly, the weight of her words lingering in the air. "Perhaps you're right." It was small, but for both of them, it was a moment of understanding, of connection that neither had anticipated but both desperately needed. The days in the Eastern Tower were long, and each passing moment seemed to stretch the boundaries of patience. Ethan had spent much of his time studying Cresian culture and history, trying to understand the political landscape that had led to this moment. But as he grew closer to Nilara, the real political storm began to take shape. The first sign of trouble came one morning when Nilara entered his quarters with a look of determination in her eyes. Her face, usually composed, was shadowed with something darker now: concern, fear, and something more. "His coming," she said, her voice low but firm. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Prince Vorathth," Nilara replied, her words laced with a bitterness she couldn't hide. "My brother." Ethan felt the weight of the name settle over him like a dark cloud. Vorathth was everything Nilara had told him about. A figure of political ambition, someone who had always resented her rise to power. But hearing the name now, with the full weight of their situation pressing down on him, it became clear. This wasn't just about a rivalry between siblings. This was about survival. "Why is he coming here?" Ethan asked, though he already suspected the answer. Nilara's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and fear. "He knows. About the pregnancy. He's been waiting for this. He will use it against me, use it to challenge my rule." Ethan's pulse quickened. The stakes had just been raised. If Vorathth challenged Nilara's throne on the grounds of this pregnancy, on the grounds that she had violated the sacred purity of the royal bloodline, it would set off a chain of events that could fracture the entire Cresian Empire. This was no longer just a personal crisis. This was a political earthquake. "But he can't just take the throne," Ethan said, trying to reason through the scenario. "He needs proof. He needs support." Nilara's lips twisted into a hard smile. "Oh, he'll find a way. It's not just about bloodlines. It's about power. He has allies among the traditionalists, among the military leaders. If he makes this public, I'll be forced to abdicate or face a civil war." Ethan's mind raced. "What do we do?" Nilara's gaze was steely, determined. "We prepare. He won't expect us to act so quickly. I'll deal with him the same way I've dealt with every political challenge before, head on." The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall outside, and for a brief moment, it felt like time itself held its breath. The confrontation was imminent. Vorathth was coming, and with him, the weight of an empire's future. Ethan felt the gravity of the moment settle deep within him. He had come to this world to build bridges, but now, he realized, he would have to fight to keep those bridges intact. The day Vorathth arrived was like the calm before a storm, heavy with unspoken tension. Ethan could feel it in the air, the shift in the atmosphere as the gates of the citadel opened to admit the prince and his entourage. Nilara had gone into full diplomatic mode, her every movement precise, controlled. But even she couldn't hide the weight on her shoulders. This was no longer just about the child or her rule. This was about survival, and Ethan was standing at the center of it all. Vorathth entered the chamber with a self-assured smirk that never reached his eyes. His posture was regal, his confidence unshaken. Ethan had heard stories about him, how he'd always felt overshadowed by Nilara, how he resented her rise to power. But seeing him now, standing in the center of the citadel, Ethan could feel the danger radiating off him. He wasn't just a political rival. He was a threat to everything they had built. Nilara didn't flinch when she saw him, but Ethan could sense the tension in her body. She was waiting, calculating, measuring every move. Vorathth made his way to the center of the room, his eyes sweeping over the gathering of advisors, military leaders, and dignitaries. When his gaze landed on Ethan, the smirk widened into a sneer. "So, this is the famous human envoy," Vorathth said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The one who has managed to convince my sister to compromise everything we stand for." Ethan didn't respond, knowing that any word spoken would only serve to escalate the situation. Instead, he focused on Nilara, who remained silent. She didn't rise to the bait. Her calm, regal presence was a stark contrast to the storm brewing in the room. "I've heard the rumors," Vorathth continued, his gaze now fixed on Nilara. "A child. A hybrid. Is this true, sister? Have you really fallen so far as to weaken our bloodline with this thing?" The venom in his words was palpable, and Ethan could see the way Nilara's expression shifted, her jaw tightening with barely contained anger. But she didn't let it show beyond that. She was in control. For now. Enough, Vorathth, Nilara said, her voice cold but authoritative. This is not the time for your games. If you've come here to disrupt the peace, you'll find that your attempts will fail. Vorath's smile faded as he took a step closer, his presence looming over them. Oh, I think you'll find that it's too late for peace. The truth is already out there. The whispers are spreading. And if you think you can contain this little accident for much longer, you're gravely mistaken. The tension in the room was unbearable. The weight of his words hung like a cloud, threatening to burst into chaos at any moment. Nilara was unshaken, but Ethan could sense the danger. This wasn't just about the pregnancy anymore. It was about a challenge to Nilara's rule, to her legacy, and to the future of the Cresian Empire. Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady despite the rising tension. You're wrong, Vorathth, he said, locking eyes with the prince. This child isn't a weakness. It's a bridge, a connection between two worlds, two species. And it will strengthen both, not tear them apart. Vorath's eyes narrowed, his expression darkening. A bridge, you say? How quaint. But I see nothing but an abomination. A child born from the union of weakness. Ethan's anger flared, but he held his ground. He wasn't just defending the child now. He was defending Nilara's right to rule, her right to choose her path. You may not understand it, Vorathth, but that doesn't change the truth. You will not destroy what she's worked for. You will not destroy her legacy. Vorath's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Ethan thought the confrontation would erupt into violence. But Nilara stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. Enough, she declared, her voice ringing out with authority. This challenge is not just an attack on me. It is an attack on the future of this empire. And I will not let it happen. Ethan could feel the weight of her words settle over the room. Nilara was done playing by the rules. She was ready to fight for her throne, for her child, for the future of her people. And in that moment, Ethan knew there was no turning back. Whatever came next, they would face it together, both of them, standing side by side, against a world that refused to accept the future they were about to create. You want to challenge me, Vorathth? Nilara's voice was unwavering now, filled with the force of someone who had nothing left to lose. Then let's see what happens when you try to tear this empire apart. The room was silent for a moment, as if holding its breath. Then, with a final, chilling look at his sister, Vorathth turned and walked away, his threat hanging in the air like a shadow. Ethan exhaled, the tension in his body slowly easing. They had made it through the first wave. But this was just the beginning. The real battle was about to begin, and they would need every ounce of strength, every bit of courage they had, to win. They were in this together now. Fate bound them in a way neither could escape. Ethan stood at the window of Nilara's chambers, gazing out at the Cresian skyline. The city below pulsed with life, a mix of ancient traditions and cutting-edge technology. His mind kept returning to the child, an impossible existence, yet now the symbol of everything they'd both fought for. It was hard to imagine how it had all come to this. A human envoy, an alien queen, and a child who could change the course of both their worlds. He glanced over at Nilara, who stood beside him, her posture weary but resolute. The weight of the empire rested heavily on her shoulders, and yet, she was no longer alone. I don't know how we're going to handle this, Ethan murmured, the uncertainty lingering in his voice. We face it together, Nilara replied softly. The child may have been their complication, but perhaps, just maybe, it was the beginning of something greater. A bridge, not just between their species, but between their futures. And the real battle had only just begun.